Freud's theory, psychoanalytic theory, has received a lot of criticism over the years. It was a very controversial theory, and there have been a number of areas of where this theory has received some particular criticism. One has to do with obviously the sexuality aspect. We talked about the psychosexual stages, particularly when we're talking about right from infancy. It's a very controversial viewpoint to talk about sexuality being a main driver of our personality right from that early age. Furthermore, no one doubts that sexuality isn't important, but it's not necessarily the main thing that drives us from day to day. So it's really Freud's theory clearly overemphasizes the sexual basis for our personality. Freud was correct that our early experiences, early childhood, do have an enormous influence on who we are, who we become as an adult. However, he really, really neglected what goes on later in life. For example, Erickson, he discusses psychosocial stages that go right from infancy all the way through old age, and talks about different crises, different issues that we deal with at each of those particular stages, and that development continues throughout your life. Really, Freud was very neglecting about, like, for example, what happens from the latency stage and genital stage. Not really much to say about what goes on there. All of the interesting stuff is happening in the oral, anal, and phallic stages. So bottom line is, the early experiences are clearly important, but they're certainly not all important. Freud mentions, Freud really focuses on the unconscious, and how the unconscious is by far the largest influence on our personality. And you think about the iceberg analogy, where most of what is interesting is going on is under the surface. But really, other theorists have emphasized what is going on consciously. In fact, there are a number of psychologists who've been called ego psychologists or ego theorists, who stress the importance of the ego. So, for example, I think that Alfred Adler might qualify as one of these theorists, where the conscious thought, your conscious decision making, plays a bigger role in your personality than Freud really thought. Freud really thought the unconscious was all important, and that what was going on consciously was really not that important after all. Researchers, theorists like Karen Horney, Erickson, Alfred Adler, they really stress more socio-cultural influences. What is going on in the society that you're living in? What is going on in your family life, your interactions with others, that it really has an enormous influence on who you are as a person. With Freud, the interesting stuff is going on inside of our heads, this dynamic between the id, the ego, and the superego that is largely going on unconsciously. That's really the important thing from Freud's point of view. But really, there's also our everyday interactions with other people, and how we feel about them, and how we connect with them, that other theorists weigh as more important. So, for example, we have Karen Horney, her sociocultural approach. As a woman, she was probably not too keen on Freud's idea that girls have penis envy during the phallic stage, where they're envying, they feel anger at their mother for castrating them, and that they're desiring to have a penis. Well, Karen Horney did not feel that was an accurate portrayal of girls and women. So she argued that First of all, we may be talking about girls having penis envy, but maybe what about boys and men having womb envy? Maybe there are attributes of the female that men would desire to have, and the attributes of men that women would desire to have. And it's not a matter of just women having penis envy. Another aspect of her approach that essentially criticizes Freud is that, again, going back to the sexuality component, Karen Horney is more about the need for security and need for safety, and this is, not really sex that's the primary motivation. And, we try to, according to Horney, basically, we're trying to protect ourselves for our security, protect ourselves against what she calls basic anxiety, and that we do various things to satisfy what are called neurotic needs, and we need for affection and approval, for example. We try to protect ourselves from anxiety using that. But really, Karen Horney is much, much, much more focused on our interactions with other people as being a key part of who we are, rather than what is going on inside of our own heads. Carl Jung was actually a disciple of Freud, but he kind of went on his own, and he and Freud had a falling out a little bit. Jung's theory took a different tack than Freud. They both argue about the importance of the unconscious. However, Carl Jung argues that there is actually a collective unconscious that all human beings have. So with Freud, you have this personal unconscious that deals with your own memories, your own experiences, your own drives that are pushing you. Carl Jung argues that as human beings, we have a collective unconscious where we all share some similarities with others as far as what is in our deepest, darkest areas of our mind. And so the collective unconscious has an enormous influence on us, essentially what makes us all human. And according to Jung, there are these archetypes, which are essentially images that are pretty common to basically everybody. For example, we have the animus and the anima. The animus is the male side of our personality, and the anima is the female side of our personality. So the masculine and feminine exist within everybody, according to Jung, and it's in the collective unconscious, and these images get popped up from time to time. Okay? So, for example, you might think about a father who is perhaps holding a baby and is being nurturing, and maybe he is kind of getting in touch with his feminine side in that particular role at that particular moment in his life. He's drawing up that archetype from our collective unconscious. Likewise, perhaps a woman who might be taking control of a situation, being a leader, maybe bringing up the animus, the masculine side. Now realize we're talking about, now obviously, we're in the 21st century here, so men are certainly allowed to be nurturing and women are certainly allowed to be powerful and leaders. But if you think about where Carl Jung is coming from, he's in the early 1900s, so the roles of women were a little bit different. So masculine and feminine, kind of definitions of them might have been a little different then than they are now. And then there's also an archetype as the persona archetype, which is kind of the face that we put on for everybody else. The mask that we wear, essentially. And it's true that the face we put on for other people is somewhat different from the inside person that we see ourselves. Bottom line is that there are a number of different archetypes that we all draw upon and essentially behave like, perhaps, to deal with different situations that come up in our lives. Finally, we have Alfred Adler. He was another disciple of Sigmund Freud, and he also went off in his own direction. And his individual psychology is different. And the idea is that it's not about pleasure seeking, like the id is pleasure seeking. It's more about striving for perfection, striving for superiority that is guiding us. The argument from Adler's point of view is that when we're born, we're very weak physically, and we have this sense of inferiority that we want to be able to become stronger. So we have this nagging sense that we are inferior, that we're weak, and we're trying to build up to strive for strength and superiority. Recognize something else that's important here in this particular theory is that we might compensate for the sense of inferiority. You might have heard of the concept of an inferiority complex. Somebody who is essentially sees themselves as weak, so they will try to do everything possible to make themselves appear strong. So, perhaps holding themselves out, pretending to be tough and pretending to be dominant, essentially, to compensate for that feeling of inferiority. Another aspect of Adler's theory that's important from his point of view is birth order. How your birth order, whether you're firstborn, middle child, or lastborn, kind of has an influence on our personality. And there's a lot of research in this area. There's a lot of people who really take birth order very, very seriously in terms of our personality. And Adler certainly was one of the people who did so.